Okay, so I'll continue from where I stopped in the last video. Let's continue with communication. We've talked about principles that guide um practice and principles that guide process. Because we talked about the process one before we talked about the practice one. So let's continue to communication. Now, what are the principles that guide effective communication? Of course, firstly is by listening. Listen. Try to focus on the speaker's words rather than formulating your response to those words. That's what can I call it? That's a skill. Should I call it a skill? That, or should I call it a virtue? That is a virtue that most people struggle with. People just want to talk without listening and forgetting that listening itself is part of communication. If all you care about is to respond, how will you make meaningful contributions when you've not listened should I say effectively or appropriately, or well, you've not listened, you've not heard what the person who talked earlier, do you know what he was trying to say? It's until you've listened clearly, that's where you can actually then say you want to make a meaningful contribution. Then prepare before you communicate. Spend time to understand the problem before you meet with us. Now, when they say come on, let's discuss, or let's communicate, or let's have a discussion, most people just come empty-headed, or without trying to spend time to actually understand what this discussion was supposed to be about. Now, when they get there, when people start raising issues, it's always difficult for people like that to actually make meaningful contributions. Someone should facilitate the activity. Now that this is very, very, very important. You cannot have a meeting where everybody is the moderator, everybody is the leader, everybody is the coordinator of the session. No. It doesn't work that way. Every communication meeting should have a leader or a facilitator to do three things. One, to keep the conversation moving in a productive direction. So it will just be fighting, or okay, sorry, not the word fight. You just dwell on irrelevances or things that are not so much important. Number two, to mediate any conflict that does occur. Now, it's possible that conflicts occur in meetings and discussions. So the work or the role of the facilitator is to be the mediator for such conflicts. Also, to ensure that other principles are followed. Now, there should be some principles, maybe depending on the kind of project, kind of industry, kind of platform. And basically, it's just to make sure that the principles are followed. For example, in a place like Bowen, each of our meetings must start with a prayer, and must end after our prayer. Maybe we sing the national anthem, then we sing the Bowen anthem. Then immediately after, in that same format, we sing the Bowen anthem, national anthem, and we close with what? A prayer. That is the principles. Those are the principles for having meetings and discussions in Bowen University. So it's the role of the facilitator to ensure that those kind of principles are followed. The face-to-face communication is best, but it usually works better when some other representation of the relevant information is present. Now, okay, two things. Number one is that face-to-face communication, but then we can argue that in situations like this coronavirus period and having physical communications becomes more difficult. Yes, we can then say, okay, let's have online meetings, but it's a social factor. It's not a technological factor. A social factor in the sense that when the chips are down in almost all ramifications of life, when talk education, business, policy making, government. Okay, when Israel and Palestine were having their fights, when it got to the point where things were getting out of hand, what happened? They had to call all of them together on a round table to have their discussion. Let's say ourselves face to face. Let's lay it out for ourselves. Let's clear our doubts. So yes, of course, we still know that things like coronavirus may not always make this possible, but most often than not, serious problems, conflicts have been resolved by face-to-face communications, and that is only possible if representation of relevant information is present. Like if you check back to the point I was talking about in principle number 2, where imagine you were to have those kind of discussions, you've not armed yourself with the right information, you don't have a clear understanding of the problem to be solved, you just went there hoping that you pick it along the line, then you have not done yourself a good, you are not being a good software engineer. So next thing, sorry, excuse me, slideshow. Okay, the next point is that take notes and document decisions. It's always very good to have someone to record the important points of such meetings and discussions and the decisions that were made, so as to have a follow-up, so as to make sure that the right points, the right decisions, the right things were carried out. Strive for collaboration. Now the thing is that you as a person, there's something you are good at, you are brilliant, but of course you can't be brilliant in all aspects of life. There's a particular aspect that you are good at. There's somebody, or even if it's not even about being brilliant, it's about what about, let's say you've had an experience trying to work on a particular task. You've had an experience, while you're working on it, you ran into some problems. One way or the other, you were able to figure it out, you were able to solve the problem, you moved on. Now, as that person has worked in another, same thing applies to another person who has worked in another aspects, who has probably encountered some problems, has been able to solve the solution or find a solution to those problems. Now, you have some solution to a particular aspect of a problem, and that person has another solution to another aspect of the problem. Does it then make sense for you? See, now you have a project that kind of bridges these two different fields together. Does it then make sense that each of the two sides now go back to now start studying for the other aspect that they don't have so much experience in? No. Firstly, they will spend too much time trying to solve the problem. Number two, it might not be solved effectively. So the most sensible thing at that point is to collaborate. First, now once you collaborate like that, you have something, you brought it to the table, the other person has something, brought it to the table, then you synergize and you have an effective product. Of course, that's even going to meet up with standards, since both of you are kind of like masters in these two different fields. So it's always good to collaborate. Then stay focused. Modularize your discussion. Of course, we cannot emphasize this. Be staying focused. Don't move out of your aim. Don't move out of your scope. Same thing applies to your final year project. Even when you're defending, if somebody asks you a question that is out of the scope of what you're trying to achieve, you politely tell the person, sir, that is a bit out of the scope of what we are looking at. What we're actually looking at is this. Same thing in software projects and software development and software development life cycle and software engineering. Stay focused with that particular aspects that you're working on, that particular concern. Of course, you still remember separation of concerns that I spoke about in the previous video. That particular concern, that particular aspect that you're working on, stay focused on it. Achieve the best results there before you move on to another aspect of your project. The more people involved in a communication, the more likely that discussion will bounce from one topic to another. Okay, now let's break this one back to communication. It's just like when people talk too much. It's just a natural principle that I guide myself with. I make sure I don't talk too much, because when you talk too much, you say what you're not supposed to say. The more people get involved in any communication, like discussion now, the more likely discussion will bounce off topic to the next. Now, make sure you're not just saying everything. That particular module, that particular concern that you're working on, sit on it, get the best results before you move on, and don't, otherwise it will just be like you guys will have moved on to another topic, and getting the results like that will be kind of difficult. If something is unclear, draw a picture. Pictures and images have a way of driving the point home naturally. If something is unclear and you try to picture it, see it pictorially, graphically, it makes you understand it better. That is why teaching aids nowadays are more visual than audio or just textual. That's we are used to. What pictorial representations are better to understand problems. Once you agree to something, move on. If you can't agree to something, move on. If a feature or a function is unclear and cannot be clarified at the moment, move on. Later on, you can come back there to resolve those kind of problems. Negotiation is not a context or a game. It works best when both parties win. When you are negotiating, it's not a question of you trying to defraud or trying to outsmart another person or trying to make sure that the other person does not gain. I mean, if they have very smart people on their team too, they will fight you, and at the end of the day, you won't achieve anything. Negotiation works best when both parties win. So there's something you want to gain, there's something another person wants to gain. Now, the best thing is to look for the common ground, so that what you want to gain, you gain it, and what the other person wants to gain, they gain it too. That's how negotiation works. Now, principles that guide planning: understand the scope of the projects. Know what exactly what you want to do. Involve the customer in the planning activity. I said it even when you guys were in school. Don't just create plans based on what you know. Let the customer be part of the development team. Recognize that planning is iterative. Yes, you cannot have all the plan set out in one sitting. It's almost impossible. It is iterative. You keep planning, you keep adjusting your plan, adjust till you have the perfect plan. You may not even have the perfect plan till the end of the project. That's just the truth. But being able to accommodate changes is what is most important. Estimate based on what you know. Don't go and start estimating what you don't know. Don't go and start saying what you know in terms of costs, duration, and your team's ability. You don't know. Only talk on based on what you know in terms of effort, cost, and task duration. Based on what you know. Planning, then consider risks as you define the plan. You said this the other time that okay, as I was saying the other time, when we talk about risk, having fail-safe plans. When I mentioned risk assessment the other time, and the whole goal of it is to have fail-safe plan for your planning. Be realistic. People don't work 100% of every day. So when you're planning, don't say that we'll finish this project in 2 weeks, and at the end of the day, you're going to spend a whole month or 2 months to do that project. Adjust granularity as you define plan. Granularity refers to the level of detail that is introduced as project plan is developed. Of course, as you are doing it, you get to understand it more, so you keep adjusting. Define how you intend to ensure quality. Of course, that is where testing comes in. The plan should identify how solid intends to ensure quality. Describe how you intend to accommodate change. Even the best plan can be obviated by uncontrolled change. Track the plan frequently and make adjustments as required. Software projects fall behind schedule one day at a time. Even if, at the end of the day, even those ones that fail too, they fail one day at a time. They don't fail just all of a sudden. They fail one day at a time. So always have that in mind. So I would like to end this class here. Next week we'll continue from where we stopped. Thank you.